The night air was colder than usual, and the streets buzzed with the hurried steps of people who had places to be, homes to return to, and warm meals waiting for them. In the middle of that restless city, a girl sat on the steps of a closed cafe. Her hair was tangled, her clothes worn thin, and a small cardboard sign lay beside her. It read in shaky handwriting, "Can I play for food?" Her name was Emily. She was only 15, but life had pushed her into corners most adults couldn't handle. She had no home, no family nearby, and no one who truly looked after her. All she had was a gift she'd discovered long before her life had fallen apart: music. Emily loved the piano. When she was younger, her mother would take her to church, and while other kids fidgeted on the pews, Emily's eyes were locked on the pianist's fingers. The way notes flowed, the way melodies painted pictures, it fascinated her. At 8 years old, she touched a piano for the first time, and something inside her clicked, like the keys were speaking a language she already knew. But life wasn't kind. Her father walked out when she was 10, and her mother, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, grew sick. By the time Emily turned 14, her mother was gone, and she was left in the system, foster homes that felt more like prisons, surrounded by people who didn't care about her gift or her grief. So she ran. She thought freedom would be better than being invisible, but freedom on the streets was brutal. Nights under bridges, days scrounging for scraps, people walking past her as if she didn't exist. And yet, Emily never let go of music. In her backpack, she carried a little notebook full of melodies she scribbled whenever inspiration struck. She didn't have an instrument anymore, but she carried the music inside her. Whenever she walked by a music shop and heard faint tunes spilling from the doors, she'd stop and close her eyes, pretending for just a moment that she was the one playing. That evening, she found herself outside a hotel where a gleaming grand piano stood in the lobby, visible through the glass doors. She pressed her face against the cold glass, staring longingly. Inside, well-dressed guests laughed, sipped wine, and moved about as if the world outside didn't exist. Emily whispered to herself, "Just one song." But she knew better. Security wouldn't let someone like her near that piano. So she picked up her cardboard sign again and sat at the cafe steps. People passed by, glancing at the sign, then at her. Some smirked, some shook their heads. A group of teenagers stopped, laughing among themselves. One of them read the words aloud, mocking her tone. "Can I play for food?" His friends burst into laughter. "What are you gonna do, bang on trash cans? That's the only piano you can afford." They walked away still laughing, tossing a half-eaten sandwich near her feet, like she was a stray dog. Emily's chest tightened, but she picked up the sandwich anyway. Hunger didn't care about dignity. Hours passed. The city lights dimmed. Emily hugged her knees and fought to stay awake, but her eyelids grew heavy. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard something. A melody, a soft, rich sound floating from the hotel lobby. She opened her eyes and saw a man at the grand piano inside, his fingers gliding effortlessly. Guests clapped politely, but Emily wasn't just listening. She was feeling every note. Her heart raced. She whispered along, predicting the next chord before it came, humming the counter-melody in perfect harmony. She knew this piece, not because she had learned it, but because music always spoke to her that way. The man finished his song and left the piano unattended. Emily's eyes stayed glued to it. Something inside her burned. For once, she didn't care about the guards or the stairs or the fact that her clothes screamed poverty. She stood, walked toward the glass doors, and pushed them open. Immediately, the lobby grew quieter. The guests noticed the girl in torn clothes stepping inside. The receptionist frowned. A security guard stood up straighter, ready to intervene. Emily's voice trembled but carried through the silence. "Please, can I just play one song? One song and I'll go?" The guard was about to step forward, but the hotel manager, curious, raised a hand. "You want to play the piano?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief. Emily nodded, clutching her cardboard sign. "Can I play for food?" Some guests chuckled, others whispered to one another. The teenagers from earlier had wandered in with their parents and immediately burst out laughing again. "She thinks she can play," one of them said loud enough for everyone to hear. The manager sighed. "This is a hotel, not a street corner. That piano costs more than your entire life. I can't just let you." But before he finished, an older woman in an elegant dress spoke up. "Let her play." All eyes turned to her. She was seated near the bar, a glass of wine in hand, her expression unreadable. "One song won't hurt," she added. "I want to hear her." The manager hesitated, but nodded reluctantly. "Fine, one song." Emily's heart pounded as she approached the piano. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the cover. She sat down, her legs barely long enough to reach the pedals. The room buzzed with whispers, some mocking, some curious. The teenagers whispered bets about how terrible it would sound. Emily took a deep breath. She placed her fingers on the keys, and then she played. At first, it was a simple melody, soft and uncertain, like a whisper breaking through silence. But then it grew. Her fingers danced across the keys with a grace no one expected. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling a story of loss, of cold nights and hunger, of longing for something more. The music swelled, filling the lobby with waves of sound so raw and beautiful that even the clinking of glasses stopped. Guests froze where they stood, the laughter vanished. Emily closed her eyes, lost in the song. Her body swayed with the rhythm, her heart pouring out through every chord. She played as if the piano itself had been waiting for her. And when the final note lingered in the air, the silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, applause erupted. It wasn't polite clapping, it was thunderous, heartfelt, stunned applause. The same people who had mocked her now stared in disbelief. Some even stood to their feet. The older woman at the bar smiled faintly. "A prodigy," she whispered under her breath. Emily opened her eyes, blinking at the sight of strangers cheering for her. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not as a homeless girl, not as someone to pity or ignore, but as an artist. But in the crowd, not everyone was clapping. The teenagers who had mocked her stood frozen, their smirks erased, their faces pale. They had laughed at her sign, called her a beggar, treated her like trash. And now, in front of everyone, she had proven them wrong. Emily looked around, her hands still hovering over the keys, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, trembling smile. She had no home, no family, no money, but she had music. And tonight, music had given her a voice. What she didn't know was that someone in that room was about to change her life forever. The applause still echoed in Emily's ears as she sat frozen at the piano bench. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her heart racing as though it had sprinted ahead of her body. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, that the clapping was just in her head. But no, the hotel lobby was alive with astonishment. Strangers who had barely glanced at her when she walked in were now leaning forward, eyes wide, hands coming together as if they had witnessed something rare and unforgettable. The hotel manager, who minutes ago nearly tossed her out, stood slack-jawed, adjusting his tie nervously. The security guard, who had been ready to grab her by the arm, looked as though he had seen a ghost. The teenagers who had mocked her now stared with open mouths, their smugness shattered. Emily's hands trembled above the keys. For once, the silence wasn't hostile. It wasn't the kind that pressed down on her shoulders when people ignored her. This silence felt heavy because people were listening, really listening. The older woman who had defended her from across the bar now rose gracefully to her feet. All eyes followed her as she approached. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor, echoing louder than the applause had. When she stopped beside the piano, she studied Emily with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than the girl's torn sweater and scuffed shoes. "What is your name?" the woman asked. Her voice was calm, commanding. Emily hesitated, clutching the edge of the bench. "Emily," she whispered. "Emily." The woman repeated it slowly, as though testing how it felt on her tongue. Then she turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just witnessed something extraordinary." The applause began again, louder this time. People clapped, some cheered, and others even whistled. A few guests reached into their wallets, slipping bills onto the piano, as though Emily were a performer deserving of a tip. For Emily, who had begged on sidewalks and been tossed coins like an afterthought, this was different. These weren't pity offerings, these were gifts of respect. But Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't know what to do with this sudden attention. For so long she had been invisible. Now, under the weight of every gaze, she felt exposed. The older woman seemed to sense this. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Emily could hear. "You have a gift, child. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Emily blinked rapidly, her throat tight. She wanted to thank the woman, but the words tangled inside her. Just then, one of the teenagers, the same boy who had mocked her earlier, sneered loud enough for others to hear. "She probably stole that song from YouTube, but she doesn't even know how to read music." The boy's father shot him a sharp look, but the damage was done. Whispers stirred in the crowd, curiosity replacing awe. Could it be true? Was this homeless girl just copying something she'd heard? Emily's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but before she could, the older woman spoke again. "Play another one," she said firmly. Emily froze. "Another one?" "Yes, something you wrote yourself." The crowd murmured. Original music? Surely she couldn't do that. The mocking teenager smirked again, sensing victory. Emily's palms went clammy. Her notebook was back in her backpack, filled with melodies only she had heard, but she had never performed them. What if they weren't good enough? What if she messed up? The woman's eyes softened. "Play," she repeated gently. Emily closed her eyes. She let the noise fade, the murmurs, the doubt, the laughter. She thought of her mother, of nights when they had no heat and her mother would hum lullabies to keep the cold away. She thought of the little notebook, its pages smudged with pencil marks. She thought of the hunger gnawing at her stomach and the way music was the only thing that ever filled it. Her fingers touched the keys again. This time she didn't play something she'd heard. She played what was inside her. A fragile melody began, trembling like a candle flame in the wind. Slowly it grew, layering into harmonies, weaving into something rich and haunting. The music swelled with sorrow, then broke into bursts of light as though grief and hope were colliding all at once. The sound was imperfect, raw, unpolished, but it was hers. Every note carried her story. By the time she reached the final chord, tears blurred her vision. She lifted her hands, trembling, and when she opened her eyes, the entire lobby was still, silent, breathless. Then came the sound of a single clap. It was the older woman again, standing tall beside her. She clapped once more, then the crowd followed, louder than before. This time no one doubted her, no one whispered. They had heard her truth. Emily's chest heaved. She didn't smile. She couldn't. The emotions were too heavy. but inside something unexplainable shifted. For the first time in so long, she felt alive. The older woman placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "You're not just a pianist, you're a prodigy." The word echoed in Emily's mind like a foreign language. Prodigy. No one had ever called her that. No one had called her anything but poor, homeless, unwanted. The manager, seeing how the crowd was reacting, quickly stepped in. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give another round of applause for, Emily?" His eyes darted nervously to the woman, realizing this event was now out of his control. Guests began approaching, dropping more money onto the piano, asking her name, asking where she learned to play. Emily could barely keep up, shrinking under their attention. The woman spoke again, cutting through the noise. "Enough. This girl doesn't need questions, she needs food." She turned to the manager, her voice sharp. "Bring her a meal, now." The manager stammered, "Yes, of course." Emily's stomach growled at the very mention of food. Soon a waiter appeared with a steaming plate, roast chicken, vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. Emily stared at it, overwhelmed. For weeks she had survived on scraps. Now, before her was a feast. "Eat," she urged. Emily hesitated. Her instincts told her it was a trick, that kindness always came with a price. But the smell was too much. She picked up the fork and began eating, slowly at first, then faster, tears slipping down her cheeks as each bite filled her with warmth she hadn't felt in months. The woman watched her silently, then finally introduced herself. "My name is Margaret Hale." She paused, letting the name sink in. Some guests whispered. It was a name they recognized. Margaret Hale was a wealthy philanthropist known for funding music schools and art programs across the country. Emily froze mid-bite, staring at her. Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile. "You play as though the piano is part of your soul. That isn't taught, that is born, and someone like you," she leaned closer, "deserves a chance." Emily's fork clattered against the plate. "A chance?" The words hardly felt real. Margaret continued, her voice steady. "If you're willing, I'll see that you have a place to stay, food, clothes, lessons, everything you need to become what you're meant to be." The crowd gasped. The hotel manager nearly choked. Emily's heart stopped. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to leap into Margaret's arms and say, "Yes!" But another voice whispered in her mind, the voice that had kept her alive on the streets. "Don't trust anyone. Don't get your hopes up. People leave. People lie." Emily swallowed hard. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you help me?" Margaret's eyes softened. "Because someone helped me when I was your age. And if they hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here." Emily's lips trembled. She wanted to trust her. She wanted to believe this wasn't just another cruel trick. But she was scared. The mocking teenager, trying to reclaim attention, shouted from the crowd, "She's just some homeless girl! You're wasting your time!" Margaret's eyes flashed. She turned sharply. "Young man, you just witnessed something you'll likely never see again in your life. Remember this moment, because someday, when Emily's name is known across the world, you'll regret every word you said tonight." The boy went silent, his face flushing red. Emily stared at Margaret, her mind spinning. Food in her belly, a stranger offering her the world, a crowd cheering her name. Was this real, or was she dreaming on the cold cafe steps outside? But as Margaret extended her hand toward her, steady and certain, Emily realized something. For the first time in years, someone wasn't turning away. Someone wasn't laughing. Someone was reaching for her. The question was, did she have the courage to reach back? Emily's small hand trembled as it hovered over Margaret's. The world around her felt like it had slowed. all the whispers and chatter fading into the background. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She thought of her mother, of the promise she once whispered in the hospital bed. "Don't give up on your music, Em. It's who you are." With a shaky breath, Emily placed her hand into Margaret's. It was warm, firm, steady, the kind of touch she hadn't felt in years. The lobby erupted into applause once more, but Emily barely heard it. At that moment, it wasn't about the crowd. It was about the possibility of hope. Margaret leaned down and whispered so only Emily could hear, "You won't have to play for food again." That night, everything changed. Margaret arranged for a car to take Emily to one of her townhouses on the quieter side of the city. Emily clutched her backpack tightly the entire ride, her little notebook of melodies pressed against her chest as if it were her shield. She didn't trust this world yet. It had betrayed her too many times. But when they arrived, she was stunned. The townhouse wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. Warm light spilled from the windows, and when the door opened, the faint scent of fresh bread and lavender drifted out. Inside, a guest room had already been prepared for her. Clean sheets, a soft bed, clothes folded neatly on a chair. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to touch anything, convinced it would all vanish if she blinked. "You're safe here," Margaret said gently. "Rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." For the first time in months, Emily slept in a real bed. No cardboard, no freezing wind, no fear of strangers stealing from her. Just warmth. She cried herself to sleep, not from sadness, but from the unbearable relief of feeling human again. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through the window. A tray sat on the nightstand, eggs, toast, fruit, and a glass of orange juice. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, as though it might disappear. Later, Margaret introduced her to a music room in the house, and there it was, a piano. Not as grand as the hotels, but polished, beautiful, alive with possibility. Emily ran her fingers over the keys, tears welling in her eyes. "You'll have access to this whenever you want," Margaret told her. "But more importantly, I've arranged lessons with a teacher who can help refine your gift. What you have, Emily, is rare. With guidance, the world will know your name." Emily shook her head in disbelief. I don't deserve this." Margaret knelt down so their eyes were level. "You deserve more than you've been given. Trust me. I see myself in you." And so it began. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Emily adjusted slowly, always with caution. At first, she was shy with the piano, afraid of making mistakes. But soon her confidence grew. She practiced every morning and late into the night, pouring her soul into the keys. Margaret often sat nearby, listening quietly, never pushing too hard, always encouraging. Her teacher, Mr. Lawson, was astonished by her progress. "He doesn't just play notes, he breathes life into them. It's instinct, genius. And you can't teach genius." But it wasn't easy. Emily battled old fears. Sometimes when Margaret was away, she would sit in the corner of her room clutching her backpack, convinced she'd wake up back on the streets. Sometimes she skipped meals out of habit, forgetting that food would always be there now. And sometimes when she made a mistake on the piano, she froze, convinced someone would yell at her or tell her she wasn't good enough. But no one did. Margaret would simply smile and say, "Every wrong note is just a step to the right one. Keep going." Months later, Margaret enrolled her in a local youth music competition. Emily nearly refused. "She'll laugh at me," she whispered, remembering the hotel lobby, remembering the mocking voices. "They laughed once," Margaret said firmly, "and you silenced them with music. Do it again." The night of the competition, Emily stood backstage, trembling in a simple dress Margaret had bought her. The auditorium was filled with families, friends, and judges. Unlike the hotel, this was a room full of musicians, people who might not be so easily impressed. When her name was called, Emily walked onto the stage, her steps slow, her knees weak. She sat at the piano, hands hovering over the keys. For a moment, the whispers in her head returned. "You're a fraud. You're nothing. You don't belong here." Then she remembered her mother's voice. She remembered Margaret's hand, and she remembered the night she played for food and found herself instead. She closed her eyes, and she played. The song was hers, an original piece she had built over weeks of practice. It began with aching notes, delicate and sorrowful, painting pictures of nights on the streets. But then it rose, brighter, fuller, filled with hope and triumph, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her fingers flew faster and faster, not with panic, but with power. She poured every wound, every hunger, every lonely night into that piano. And when the final chord rang out, the silence that followed was absolute. Then the room exploded into applause. Judges stood, families cheered, and Emily, overwhelmed, bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't just win the competition, she stole the hearts of everyone in that room. From that night on, doors opened. Invitations to play, scholarships to music schools, interviews. Margaret guided her every step of the way, always reminding her, "Stay true to your music. Fame is nothing without heart." Years later, Emily stood on a far grander stage, an international concert hall, a sea of people waiting in silence. Cameras broadcast her performance across the world. The same girl who once begged to play for food was now a celebrated pianist, her name spoken with awe. Emily Hart, the prodigy who rose from the streets to touch the stars. Backstage before her performance, she still carried her little notebook. Its pages were worn, but inside were the first melodies she had ever scribbled in the dark. She opened it, smiled, and whispered, "We made it, Mom." That night, as her fingers flew across the keys, she wasn't just playing for the audience. She was playing for every hungry night, every cold morning, every cruel laugh, every person who had once walked past her as though she were invisible. She was playing for the girl on the cafe steps, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Can I play for food?" The audience rose to their feet when the last note faded. Thunderous applause filled the hall, but Emily didn't hear it the way she once did. Because now she didn't need their validation. She already knew who she was. A pianist, a survivor, a prodigy. And as she bowed, her eyes found Margaret in the front row, smiling proudly. Emily smiled back, her heart full, knowing that the laughter of strangers no longer defined her story. She had written her own.